Are live.
Yay.
Sunday morning live. Welcome, everybody.
All right, fun. Hello. Okay, so my name is Imani Austin. I attend the Overlake School and I am in 8th grade. Should I give you? Okay, so the reason why I created this presentation was because in my 8th grade health class there were some extreme episodes of racism going on in the class debate. And so I took that as a learning experience and decided to teach my classmates a little bit more about the internalized racism in our society. So I talked to my English teacher, and the book that we were reading, A Gathering of Old Men, actually talked a bit about the internalized racism in their society in 1979. So I decided to take a bit of the history of that book and translate it into my own presentation about America in the past, present, and the future. Martin Luther King Jr. was a very strong influence on the civil rights movement. But did you know that some people say without one girl who was not much older than myself, many of the civil rights leaders that we now know today would not have existed. Her name was Marta Coleman. She refused to give up her seat on a bus 9 months before Rosa Parks did. She was 15 years old when she was arrested in Montgomery, Alabama for not giving up her seat to a white woman. She was on the bus and she was thinking about a paper that she was writing about the civil rights movement and how she could make an effect on the world. So she decided to refuse to give up her seat, and that is kind of what started the idea for the bus boycott. So Marta Coleman got pregnant. She was a teen mother about 1 or 2 years after this event had occurred, and so they decided it would not have been good for a teenager to be in the face of the public, especially pregnant. So as soon as they found out that she was pregnant, they completely closed the case that was being attended to at that time. So she is now recognized in culture, as in TV shows nowadays, as one of the people who kind of jump-started the civil rights movement and brought it to Montgomery, Alabama. Okay. This word, adonormativity, is the normativity of adults and adult-like experiences over children and childlike experiences. So Marta Coleman was the first person to make a statement and set off the movement. Some say that without Marta Coleman, we wouldn't have had some of the great leaders of the civil rights movement that we have today, such as Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. So it's always important to check the world around us from a different perspective. Because that's the only way that we can attempt to see the truth of our society. The viewpoint in which you gaze matters, for it determines the story that you shall receive. On the following slides, I have collected information from my family members and fellow peers to see what life is like from their perspectives, from both the past and the present. Please recognize the differences between generations, race, and gender, and how that impacts the viewpoint in which they see the world. Because everyone sees things sculpted around their experience or lack thereof. All right. So this is because the book that we read was based in 1979 Louisiana. But I personally couldn't find people who were alive in 1979 Louisiana, so I went for the closest thing I could get, 1979 Chicago. So this first one is according to my father. He was growing up, he was about 8th grade, so my age, in 1979 in Chicago. So he talked a little bit about two different things, what it was like for him as a kid and what he noticed in his parents growing up as part of the working class. So for his parents, as part of the working class in 1979, there was a lot of racism in their society. So black people who worked in white neighborhoods would have to leave that neighborhood by sunset, or they would be harassed, but nothing would happen to white people who worked in black neighborhoods. A lot of gangs would be in white neighborhoods who would be harassing those black people. And there was a lot of reverse psychology in segregated neighborhoods. So in segregated neighborhoods, it would be like, for black people, if you come into that neighborhood, you can only be there during the time that the sun was up, but it wouldn't be like that for white people. White people were a lot of the times in places of power, and it was hard to find black people in charge, and it was hard to make it as a black person because a lot of the times you were very much underpaid. So again, about segregated neighborhoods, you probably all know about the separate but equal and how it wasn't actually equal. Okay, terms, white flight is when white people are living in an unsegregated neighborhood and they leave that neighborhood because they don't want to be associated with the black people who are living in said neighborhood. And black people had to be diligent when speaking to white people, whether that was in work or just in seeing a white person. And things that my dad enjoyed as a kid in 1979 were disco and bell-bottom jeans, because it was a fun time to be a kid in 79. Okay. So now this is according to my mom, who was also in Chicago. So she was in about 5th or 6th grade at this time. And she said she wasn't very much aware of political things or world matters, but the things that she could remember were that Nixon was already impeached and resigned, Jimmy Carter was president, there was a nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island, and nuclear plants were melting down. So as I said, my mom was in about 5th or 6th grade at this time, and she said this was kind of a calm time in her childhood, because the most violent racist in her neighborhood had just moved out, so there was less vandalism in her neighborhood, and this was right before she started working. So it was a bit of a calm time, but it was still a very hard year for her because she changed schools, and she went from a school where it was majority children of color at that school to minority children of color at the school. Things my mother enjoyed in 5th and 6th grade in 79 in Chicago were SNL, Chipmunk Punk, The Silvers, her favorite song was Hotline. It was a very calm time in her childhood, as I said. She really enjoyed theater, dancing and singing with friends, riding her bike, playing football, baseball, kick the can, and ghosts in the graveyard with kids in her neighborhood. Okay, so now we're going to be moving into present day. And this first one is according to my brother. So to give America a grade, as it is, he would give it a C. Racism is 8 out of 10, 10 being the worst, so very, very bad. It's not the worst in the whole entire world, but it's still not as open as we could be. But we're still making minor steps towards change. So for my brother, his personal experience, he hasn't experienced a lot of full frontal racism. Like, he's never had people come up to him and say straight to his face that they hate black people. But there has been a lot of microaggressions. So my brother's first memory of racism was when he was about 6 years old. He went to get a haircut in Chicago with our grandmother, and the lady who was cutting people's hair said that she didn't cut black hair. And my brother, not being aware of race because he was 6 years old, looked back into the barbershop and saw someone whose hair was very dark, so black, and he was very confused. He's like, but that person has black hair, why can't you cut my hair? And so our grandmother took him out of there and got him a lollipop. He was very confused, but he was happy because he had a lollipop and he was 6 years old. So things my brother likes to do in current day America with his time are sleep, eat, do gymnastics, and draw. Okay, so now this is according to my mother again, but this is with present day. So to give America a grade, she would give it a C. Racism is 7 out of 10, so it's still very, very bad, but again, not the worst in the whole entire world. Reasons for her saying that racism is 7 out of 10. A black boy who was playing basketball at an away game in Utah was handcuffed for trespassing, the only one on his team handcuffed for trespassing at an away game for basketball. A black boy in Texas was told he was not allowed to walk in graduation and was suspended for growing his dreadlocks. So either he had to cut his hair or he was not allowed to graduate, and he had in-school suspension. Children are sleeping in cages, separated from their families, and that will cause permanent trauma, and they can't find their families. There's no clean water in Flint, still. And in Seattle, when a black woman calls the police with a mental health emergency, she ends up dead, shot by the police in her own home. So for my mom and her personal experience, there's a fairly consistent and regular occurrence in her world of racism. She hasn't been directly experienced the worst of it. It's not as bad as it could be, but it's just a consistent presence of microaggressions. Things that my mom liked to do in present-day America are watch movies, go to festivals, carnivals, and plays, and picnic in the park on a sunny day, hang out on the beach, go to museums, dance, and sing. Okay, now this is according to my dad, present-day America. To give America a grade, a C-, racism, 8 out of 10, bad. So the incarceration rate of black and brown people is critically out of proportion in relation to the white male population. The prison system must be reevaluated in order to restore equity for current prisoners, and a rehabilitation system is greatly needed to reflect the crimes and time served. So to summarize this a little bit, the population of brown and black males compared to white males is extremely out of proportion. And if we had a system, instead of locking people up and sending them to jail, to give them a chance to have a bit of mental rehabilitation, it would be more likely for people to say, like, yes, I need help, instead of like threatening them and accusing them of something that they might not have done. So for my dad, racism has been very subtle as he was growing up in Chicago on the South Side. Black Americans were allowed to have a moderate level of success in corporate America and as business owners, but typically white Americans were in the leadership roles in the communities. Chicago was segregated into at least 50 neighborhoods, and everyone acknowledged those boundaries and made it home before sunset, for the black people, of course, because the white people could do whatever they want. And so things that my dad likes to do in present-day America, he participates in community-based organizations that advocate for social justice, economic empowerment, and educational opportunities for underserved communities and people. He likes to play basketball, eat food, especially donuts. He likes movies, and he loves music, especially DJ services. Yeah. So I've interviewed some of my peers at school. This one is from one of my fellow peers, also in 8th grade, who was white. To give America a letter grade, a C or a D, America is about in the middle for racism. So people don't want to be openly called racist, but there are still a lot of racist ideas and beliefs, but at least there are ideas that racism is bad. There's still a lot of racism, and you can shame people if they do racist things. Again, I'd like to point out that this is a white person, and it really kind of shows a little bit in how they said you can shame people for doing racist things. For me personally, I didn't really find that to be true. It's like something that you can do, I guess, but it's not something that I would think would be like something to do. For this student, they have had a more positive experience in America. Things are pretty good for them, but it's still very stressful because America does a lot of really bad stuff. This student really likes technology, the IT movement, coffee, comic books, regular books, and Overlake, which is the school that we attend, because most of the time it's pretty good.
What is the IT movement?
Oh, that kind of just relates back to like technology and how technology came into America.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know it was a movement.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is according to another peer, also white, in 8th grade. To give America a letter grade, a C-. Compared to other places and parts in history, racism isn't as bad, so they give it a 7 or an 8 out of 10. they made sure that I say 10 is bad. They haven't experienced racism at all, just stereotypes of white people, no experience of racism. This student enjoys ski bus and school productions. Okay. Now this is according to 2 fellow peers, both Asian American and in 8th grade. To give America a grade, they give it a B. It's okay, 5 out of 10 for racism. It's very chaotic, but it's a pretty good government compared to others. They have had casual, slightly racist comments because America is a mediocre place to be living. It's not the worst, it's not the best. These students enjoy volleyball because you only live once. So looking forward, you can have many different hopes. These hopes can be crushed due to our personal trauma and the cruel efforts of reality to crush us. For example, you may be hoping for peace while in reality waiting for the pain to come, as you know it will. On the following slides, I have collected information on what my family and fellow peers look for in their dream future versus the reality future they may see. Please pay attention to the differences in wishes and reality. Remembering the fact that everyone is in a different position. So for future America, according to my father, his dream for America, racism would be eliminated. There would be a lot more tolerance for immigrants in the United States. A black woman would be president, not just could be, but would be. And there would be a way to do proper reparations for former slavery. But in reality, black folks don't have inherited wealth. We stay in debt. Consumer debt, educational debt, and household or real estate debt. So you want to buy a house, you get into debt. You want to go to school, you get into debt. There's no base of money to start on, there's no funds, and the cycle must be broken in order to be economically stable for future generations and families. So, for example, all of my father's debt when he dies would roll on to me and my siblings. When we die, that rolls on to our children, and it just keeps going, and it's a cycle. And if we had a way to eliminate that cycle, we could all start on a level playing field instead of black people having a lot of debt because they don't have the funds to go to school or to get a job that they can use to like pay for their mortgage. Okay. Now this one's according to my mom. So for her dream America, we would acknowledge racial and cultural differences with appreciation and wonder. Racial differences would not have an impact upon one's experience of justice or opportunities for stability and access to the things that we need. Finding a black woman counselor wouldn't be a hard thing or just really necessary. So when my mom is talking about this, she's talking about kind of like therapy and relating this to PTSS, which I will talk about later in the presentation. In reality, we're headed towards a cataclysmic collision point, like fire point, flashpoint, where everything that is going on in our world is going to blow up in our faces, like climate change, racism, homophobia, sexism. And it's going to force people to decide what kind of world we want to live in and what kind of nation we want to be. She wants to believe that it can't get much worse before it gets better, but she fears that the worst is coming. Right. Now, according to my brother, a dream America would have 2 things in particular. A place where people would be treated equally and not judged because of their race. But in reality, things are going to get worse. It's going downhill, and there's a cycle of oppression, from slavery to segregation, Jim Crow laws into mass incarceration. The worst is coming, but we must be vigilant, and we must talk about the things we have done in our past to move forward. Now, this is according to 2 of my fellow peers, 1 white, 1 Asian American, both in 8th grade. So for a dream America, they want something that would be peaceful, with green energy, where we would accept people and have diversity and appreciation of said diversity. But in reality, there will be climate change, a slow positive change, and then we will all die. Okay. So just going back, some frequently asked questions that I had from my last times with doing this presentation. The school to prison pipeline is a systematic process that criminalizes children and childhood behaviors and impacts children of color in particular, putting them into the prison system at an early age. So, a school to prison pipeline example. If someone at Overlake, the school that I go to, were to disrespect a teacher, they might, at worst, result in a call home or possibly a suspension where you're not allowed to come to school for a while. But in schools where police officers are employed, children of color who disrespect or talk back to an authority figure are committing a criminal offense and are no longer dealing with the education system, but the justice system, and they're on their way to prison. As I said, white flight, when white people who live in an unsegregated neighborhood move out of that neighborhood because they don't want to be associated with the African Americans in the neighborhood. Heteronormativity, the assumption that adults and adult experiences are normal while children and childish experiences are deviant or other. And PTSS, which is the generational trauma of slavery that has been passed down through generations, accompanied by certain behaviors. So, for example, in a time of slavery, Black parents would tell the slave owner that their child was underachieving or lazy in order to keep their family together. So, a lot of people in my grade did not know this, but slavery was outlawed in 1865 in the United States of America. And modern day slavery is kind of the transfiguration of that past slavery into internalized racism and systematic oppression. So a bit for me on why I did this. So despite the talk around my generation and us being woke and completely diverse and accepting, the reality is that we are afraid of said differences. And the conversation around such topics is seen as something to fear, as if conversations of race are racist. And the current climate of my generation is very hot with temperatures rising. Sorry. Between climate change and the expectations to solve all of the world's problems, we may be under some stress. So everyone is afraid to talk about race. They fear that it comes with a consequence. And justly so. Most discussions about race can easily become unorderly racist. Henceforth, my generation ceases to speak of such differences. So one of the reasons why I bring this up is because when I was interviewing people, a lot of people did not want to be interviewed about race. They were like, you can talk to me about anything but that, literally anything but that. So I mostly interviewed my friends, and the people I interviewed are always the same people. So just kind of like in different combinations. But it was really difficult to find people to interview, and I'm starting to realize that my generation, even though we're said to be like the woke generation, the really diverse generation, it's not really true because we're still afraid to talk about these things because of all of the wokeness. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Do you think the uncomfortability of people not wanting to talk about race is due to the fact that maybe the acknowledgement would need to render reparation for the past behavior?
Yeah, so the question was kind of like, why would the generations be afraid of like the internalized racism in our society? Because that would probably cause them to have to do reparations for former slavery. And I think that is true because a lot of the times people don't want to look to the past and be like, oh, we did that wrong. We should probably do something about that. So they just kind of move forward. When in reality, if we had a proper way to do reparations for former slavery, we could all have a bit more of equality and equity, I believe at least. Any other questions?
Can you talk about how PTSS shows up today?
Yeah, okay. So as in the example where Black parents would tell the slave owner that their child was underachieving or lazy, that kind of translates into present day America, where Black parents may not congratulate their children for doing something well. They may be like, oh, you could have done better, and find like other ways to tell them like, not the best, but you're trying, so I guess that's okay. Yeah, and because of that system of parents telling their children that they're underachieving, that translates into those children telling their children that they're underachieving. The cycle continues, and that's how the trauma gets transferred from generation to generation. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm wondering, you had conversations with so many different
Mhm.
people. Was there anything in those conversations that surprised you or helped you sort of locate yourself in the present as you're having these like past, present, future conversations with people?
Yeah. So kind of like locating myself through the past, present, and future. I would say probably looking at it, I feel like present day America is a good place to be living. Not the best, as it has been said many times, but still looking into it from my parents' perspective of the past. It was really difficult for them, but it was still good for them growing up, and they feel like that really shaped the way that they are today. And I'm really thankful for that still, because if it wasn't for that time, my parents might not be the people who they are today. And I really love my parents as who they are today. And for the present, when I was interviewing my peers, it really kind of became evident to me that my parents made a very big deal of like, we are going to talk about race even though you are very young, because this is something that is going to impact you. And I realized just kind of now that not every family has that conversation, especially not white families. So when I go to talk to white people about race, they get scared and they think that I'm setting them up to be racist. And I'm not. I'm just trying to help them learn, and I'm trying to help enhance the experience by bringing them into the like lesson. So I guess what's really become evident to me is that our experiences are different, and in order to have a more equitable society, we need to realize that everyone's experiences are different, and because of our skin color, we are treated differently in the world, and some families have to talk about that in order for their children to survive. Other families don't have to worry about that. And realizing that has really kind of made me notice a lot more about like how I might be approaching these conversations about race that would make these white people more comfortable and more willing to talk to me about this, instead of having them be scared and feel like they're being set up to be racist. Yes.
When you gave your presentation in class, were there some conversations that came out of that?
Yeah, so since I've given my presentation, I've had a lot of positive feedback, but what's really been sticking with me is there's been about like 2 or 3 people who have been a bit more openly racist about things, and it's really encouraged me to kind of take that as a bit more like feedback and seeing like, yes, I helped all of these people, but I'm not going to take it as a win until everybody feels like they're being included in this lesson, in this learning. And a lot of the time, it's like you can't tell whether they're being racist because they're racist, or if they're being racist because it's an accident and they want to learn. It's not okay to be racist, whether it's an accident you want to learn or not, but still it's a bit better if it's an accident, because that way you can take that experience and be like, okay, so you want to learn about this, but you don't have the right words to say it. And I've talked to my teachers a lot about this. It's really been impacting me, and I have noticed just on Friday, the first block of the day was study hall, and I came into the classroom really like down in the dumps. One of my teachers, my health teacher, actually noticed, and she was like, hey, Imani, you look like you're about to cry. Do you want to take a step outside for a second? And I talked to her, and it really made me realize that I have had this great impact on people, whether it's for the positive or the negative. I'm starting to do what I've always wanted to do and leave an impact in the middle school and leave my kind of like place and be like, hey, this is what's going on in our society, and in order to get better, we need to recognize what happened in the past and say, okay, we're going to have to fix this in the present to have a better future. Yes.
I had a question that kind of brings together some of these things that you just addressed, because I'm wondering about your school as a whole and how Overlake provides opportunity to have these dialogues. So it's not up to, you as a student to generate and hold all of that, but that they facilitate this and make the campus a place for dialogue and become the adults that these other people don't have in their lives, who are able to talk about their own race, their own racialized experience, and help you all to learn those skills too.
Yeah, well, I'd say our school is moderate.
See, Mateo.
As has been said many times, it's not the worst, but it's not the best.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt like race wasn't being talked about, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. Because if there's one thing that my parents have taught me, if something isn't happening, do it yourself. Because you can't just sit around and wait for someone else to do it, because it's not gonna happen. So I decided I'm gonna do this, because if I'm encouraging myself and my fellow peers and the teachers that it's okay to talk about race, then hopefully more conversations about race will occur. I know my English teacher, she is a white woman, but she really was like happy that I was taking this as a chance to talk about race. And she's like, yeah, this book is 100% about race. And if we don't talk about race, I don't think we're reading the book. So that was really important to me. And another space where I felt really safe talking about race was my social studies classroom. Because the social studies teacher, she's a Latina female. And so when I'm in that space, it feels like a really open and welcoming space. But at the same time, it's like those spaces where you feel safe. After I did this presentation, I realized aren't always going to feel safe to me, because the places where these racist comments have been occurring the most have been in my safe spaces, my English classroom, my social studies classroom, even sometimes in PE. So that kind of occurrence is making me realize that by taking a stand, it's not always going to be positive. And by doing this, as a student, I've put myself in a position where people are looking up to me. So in a lot of English class discussions, my teacher will start it out and she'll be like, okay, and then I'm just going for it. I'm helping and I'm teaching the class because I know so much about this, because this is how I've been raised, knowing about these things. But in other classes, I feel like I'm just gonna sit back and see where this goes. So I did that in one of my classes. I sat back, I didn't say a word, and I tried to see where the conversation went without me guiding it. And in the end, it ended with some children saying, wouldn't you be black if you were born in Africa as a white person and then moved to America? Would you be African American? And I was perplexed, let's put it that way, because they weren't realizing that race was about more like the color of your skin than about where you were born. Because you can be born anywhere in the world, but your skin isn't going to reflect that. You could have had like the most African childhood, but still be white. And something that they brought up, which I'm kind of like a bit proud of them for realizing this, is that albino people exist. And they were like, okay, so if you were born in Africa and you're albino, are you black? And they're kind of like, they're thinking about these things, and it's making me a bit happy that they're thinking about these things without me having to guide them there. But still, there are comments made that are racist, and when I'm not stepping in, more so. But also what I've realized since I made this presentation first was that classes that I'm in, when we're talking about race, people will start speaking, they'll look at me, they'll see my face like, eh, and then they're gonna be like, that's wrong. And I'm like, very good. You can read facial expressions. So that's kind of what's been helping me keep going, and I think also inspiring my teachers and making them believe that it's okay. And I know the health teacher, she also teaches a high school class for life skills. She started a little project about the Black experience, where everybody picks a name from a hat of a Black person, they report about them. None of them are people who are like, what's the word? Athletes, that's the word.
Yeah.
Not sports people, athletes. None of them are athletes, because she didn't want to enforce the stereotype that Black people had to be athletes. And after my presentation, she added Marta Coleman. So,
Nice.
I'm making an impact on the high school as well.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions?
So what is this made you curious about that you want to follow up on or learn
yeah,
more
okay.
about or explore?
That is actually a great transition question. So, first, Happy Women's History Month.
Yay!
Okay.
National Women's Day today.
Yay!
Yay!
And then, okay, so, great. To answer your question, what this has made me realize is that I can do more. As I identify as a person and part of the LGBTQIP+ community, I decided I'm going to make another presentation just like this one about that community and talk about intersectionalities, because that's what our next book is talking about. Boom. Okay. So, I actually was thinking, because it's really difficult at my school where people are afraid to talk about things that they're afraid they can be like homophobic or racist or sexist, that it would be good to get some outside perspectives. So I have written a sheet of questions that I would be asking to people that I'd be interviewing for these presentations. And if you are interested, I would love to give you that sheet of paper so that you can answer said questions and I can have diverse opinions. And the questions are yes or no, or on a scale of 1 to 10. Some are like multiple choice, so that way I don't have to go through a bunch of written answers. But
And we'll post it on the.
we'll post it on
the church's
the
pages.
church's pages. So I was just kind of hoping that I could get some outside opinions and experiences that I can add to this new presentation to make it a little bit less of like a little thing in my overlay community and make it kind of a thing about like this is bigger than just our little overlay bubble, because our school talks a lot about how like there's no racism in our school, our little overlay bubble is perfect, and then racism occurs and they're like, I did not see that. Okay, moving on. And then they don't really recognize it. So by doing this, I'm thinking hopefully I can make a bigger impact and make something happen that will be a positive impact and try to eliminate the negative. Though I know it's not possible, it would be a very nice thing to happen. So that's what I am hoping to do. Any further questions? Yes.
So, is there a way, if this is even makes sense, is there a way for people to recognize that they are racist, that pretty much everybody is, but not think of it as a negative thing where they have to just shut down? How can you take the realization that you're racist and make it a plus? Work with it to make it not necessarily negative. I mean, there's so many people who get so offended when they get told, well, you know, that's racist. That's where the conversation ends. Is there a way to make it go from there and turn it into a learning experience, I guess?
I guess it's also in the wording. Instead of going up to someone and saying, that's racist, stop it, bad, go up and say, hey, maybe try this different wording. Would you like to learn? I'm also learning about this. Would you like to come on this journey with me so we can learn together, instead of being like, I know so much more than you, that was bad. Take them on the journey with you and like lead them into a place where they can like learn about it, instead of feeling like, you called me racist, I don't like that, conversation over.
Yeah.
Encourage them into relationship and community.
That makes sense.
Amen.
Wow.
So thank you, Imani. We're going to be tuning off the live feeds right now, and we will see you back on Instagram and Facebook Live at 10:30 for worship. Thanks, everybody.
Do you have these handouts for us to fill out